He had fired 7 maids in just 1 month, each leaving in tears. But when a quiet black woman walked into his mansion, everything changed. His autistic son, who hadn't spoken a single word in years, suddenly whispered something that froze the billionaire where he stood. From that moment, nothing in their lives would ever be the same. David Callahan was one of the richest men in the country, but inside his mansion there was only silence. His company, Callahan Health, made millions every month, yet no amount of money could fix what truly mattered to him. His 5-year-old son, Noah. The boy had stopped speaking the day his mother died. Since then, the mansion had become a quiet prison, filled with fear and unanswered prayers. Every corner of that house carried memories. The grand piano no longer played. The garden where his wife used to read had turned dull, and Noah's laughter was only an echo in David's mind. He remembered how his son once ran into his arms shouting, "Daddy," and now the child could not even look at him. Doctors called it severe autism. But to David, it felt like his little boy had disappeared into another world. He tried everything: therapy, speech lessons, new toys, new doctors, anything that money could buy. He filled Noah's room with colorful lights, soft blankets, and sensory toys. None of it worked. The boy screamed at loud sounds, hid from sunlight, and spent hours staring at the same wall. Every caretaker that came into the house left in tears. Some said Noah was too difficult. Others said he was hopeless. In 1 month alone, David had fired 7 maids. Each time, he promised himself the next one would be different. But each time his temper got the best of him. He blamed the staff for every cry, for every fearful reaction, for every sleepless night. Yet deep down, he knew the real reason his son was hurting. It was him. David had been too focused on work, too focused on winning. And when his wife died, he did not know how to be gentle anymore. He lived in meetings and numbers, but now, none of it mattered. The boardrooms were replaced by hospital rooms, and the man who once controlled everything could not control the pain in his own home. Noah's room had special lights because the normal ones made him panic. The soundproof walls kept his cries from reaching the rest of the house. The boy hardly ate. He only accepted food of certain colors or textures, and if anything felt wrong, he would throw the plate across the room. At night, David sat outside his son's door, listening to the silence. There were no words, no laughter, just the soft hum of the air vent and his own broken thoughts. He would whisper, "I'm here, son." But the child never answered. One morning, after another long night of no sleep, David sat in the study staring at an old photo of his family. His wife's smile shone through the frame, holding baby Noah in her arms. His chest tightened. "What would you have done?" he whispered to the picture. He felt like he had failed both of them. The company's profits meant nothing when his own son could not call his name. That afternoon, a new housekeeper arrived. Her name was Maria Johnson. She came quietly, carrying a small bag and a simple smile. There was nothing fancy about her. No makeup, no expensive perfume. Her uniform was plain, her shoes worn. The head staff gave her quick instructions. No talking to the child, no questions about the family, just cleaning and organization. Maria nodded and said softly, "I understand." She didn't look nervous, only calm. David barely noticed her that first day. He was too busy arguing on the phone with another therapist. By evening, when Maria finished dusting the hallway, she caught a glimpse of Noah sitting under the staircase, hugging a small stuffed horse. He didn't look at her, didn't move, just pressed his face into the toy. Maria stood still for a moment, then continued mopping without a word. She hummed a quiet tune under her breath, something old, something her grandmother used to sing. It wasn't loud, just a soft melody that floated through the quiet hall. The next day, she came back with the same calmness. She swept the living room, wiped the tables, and folded the laundry with steady hands. She never forced a smile at Noah, never reached out to touch him, never made sudden moves. She treated him like air, present but not pressured. David watched from the upper balcony once, confused by her calm. Every other maid had tried too hard. This one simply worked. That evening, Maria noticed a cup of milk left untouched on the counter. For the boy, the cook, Betty, told her, shaking her head. He never drinks it. Maria said nothing. Later, she warmed a fresh cup, placed it gently on the floor near the hallway where Noah usually sat, and walked away. She didn't look back, didn't wait to see what would happen. The following morning, when she returned to clean the same hallway, the cup was empty. Maria smiled a little to herself but said nothing to anyone. She continued her work as usual. Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm formed. Wherever she worked, Noah would appear nearby. Sometimes behind furniture, sometimes sitting on the floor watching her sweep. He didn't speak, but his eyes followed her. She kept humming that same soft tune. She didn't sing to him directly. She just let the sound live in the air. David started noticing the difference. The house felt less tense. Noah still didn't talk, but he wasn't screaming as often. He spent longer outside his room, quietly observing Maria. David didn't understand it. "What is she doing differently?" he asked Betty one evening. The cook shrugged. "She just works, sir. Maybe the boy feels safe around her." David didn't respond, but he started watching Maria more closely. Maria had her own story, one she never told anyone. Years ago, she had been a nurse. She worked with children who had special needs, until one mistake, one accusation, ended her career. She lost her license, her job, and her daughter. Since then, she had been trying to rebuild her life quietly. When she came to the Callahan mansion, she promised herself to stay invisible. But when she saw Noah, she felt something familiar, a kind of pain she once knew. She didn't plan to get involved, but her heart wouldn't let her walk away. One evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Maria stayed a little longer in the laundry room folding towels. The house was silent except for the soft sound of rain tapping against the window. She felt tired but peaceful. For once, she didn't feel like she was running from her past. She was just present, in the moment. As she lay down for a quick rest on the couch, she didn't notice small footsteps approaching. A few minutes later, something light touched her chest. It felt like a toy, gentle and plastic. She opened her eyes slowly and saw Noah kneeling beside her, holding a small toy stethoscope. He placed the end of it against her heart, listening. Maria froze. His eyes were calm, focused. It was the first time he had ever looked directly into hers. Then, in a small, trembling voice, he whispered, "I will heal you, Mommy." Maria's heart stopped. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't move. For the first time, Noah had spoken, and the word he chose was Mommy. She didn't correct him. She just let the tears fall silently. That single sentence filled the room like light after years of darkness. At that same moment, David stepped into the doorway. He had come to ask about a report, but when he saw what was happening, he couldn't breathe. His son was kneeling beside the maid, talking, connecting. His eyes widened, his mouth opened, but no words came. He heard his son's soft voice again, "I will heal you, Mommy," and his knees weakened. He had waited years for his son to speak, but he never imagined it would happen like this. He turned away, unable to hold back his tears. His son wasn't broken after all, and maybe neither was he. He didn't know what this meant or what would happen next. But for the first time in years, David felt hope, small and trembling, like a spark refusing to die. That night, as rain continued to fall outside, the mansion that had once felt like a tomb was filled with something new. Not noise, not chaos, but the gentle sound of a child's voice returning to life. The next morning came quietly at the Callahan mansion. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like wet soil and peace. For the first time in years, David woke up feeling something strange, something he had forgotten long ago. Hope. He had not slept much. His mind had been replaying that moment again and again. His son, Noah, speaking those words to Maria. He wanted to believe it was real, that it wasn't just his imagination, But the sound of that small voice still echoed inside him. At breakfast, the house felt lighter. Betty hummed in the kitchen, and even the staff walked a little slower, as if afraid to break the new calm. Maria worked quietly, washing dishes near the sink. David walked in, dressed in his usual gray suit, but his eyes looked softer. He glanced at her, unsure of what to say. "You were with him last night," he said quietly. Maria didn't stop washing. "Yes, sir," she replied simply. "What did you do?" he asked. "He spoke, I heard him. I thought he couldn't." Maria turned off the tap and wiped her hands. "I didn't do anything special," she said, her tone calm. "He came to me. Maybe he felt safe." David sat down at the table, resting his elbows on his knees. "He called you Mommy," he whispered. Maria looked down, her eyes soft. "Maybe he remembers his mother. Maybe he needed to say it to someone." David nodded slowly. He didn't know whether to feel grateful or jealous. For years, he had tried to reach his son with doctors, programs, and therapy. Yet this woman, who had been in his house for less than 2 weeks, had done what no one could. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't ignore it either. Later that day, David went to his office to work, but his mind wasn't on the papers. He kept thinking about Maria, about Noah's voice, about how his boy had looked at her with trust. It made him question everything. By evening, he asked his advisor, Linda Parker, to meet him. Linda had worked with him for years. She was sharp, confident, and always spoke like she owned every room she entered. When David mentioned Maria, her face changed immediately. "That woman," she said firmly, "is dangerous. You shouldn't have hired her." David frowned. "What do you mean?" Linda crossed her arms. "Her name came up years ago at Riverbend Children's Clinic. She was fired for negligence. There was a case, something about a child and a mistake she made. She lost her license. I didn't think you'd bring her here without checking." David's heart sank. "Negligence?" Linda nodded. "She's unstable, David. Emotional. She forms unhealthy attachments to children. That's what the report said. If you care about your son, you need to let her go before something happens." The words hit him hard. He sat quietly for a while, staring at the floor. Part of him wanted to ignore her, but the other part, the cautious businessman, began to doubt. What if Linda was right? What if Maria's calmness was just a mask? He had been fooled before by people who pretended to care. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, David couldn't sleep. He sat alone in his study, staring at the fire, thinking about the photo of his wife on the desk. Her smile seemed to ask him one question: "Do you trust your heart?" Maria, meanwhile, was in the laundry room folding towels. She sensed something heavy in the air, a shift she couldn't name. She didn't know that Linda had already started digging through her past again. For Maria, the only thing that mattered was Noah. The boy had followed her around all day, quiet but calm. When she hummed, he listened. When she placed a cup of milk near the hall, he drank it. Small things, but to her, they meant everything. That night, as she finished her work, David appeared in the doorway. His expression was hard to read. "Maria," he said softly, "I need to ask you something." She turned to face him, her hand still holding a folded towel. "Is it true," he continued, "that you were a nurse once? At Riverbend Clinic?" Maria froze for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "And is it true," he added, his voice trembling slightly, "that something happened there? Something bad?" Maria looked down. "Yes, something happened," she said quietly, "but it wasn't what they said. I tried to help a child when no one else would. I was blamed when it went wrong. I lost everything. My license, my daughter, my name." David's throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it doesn't change who I am now," she replied. "I came here to work, not to explain my past." He wanted to believe her, but Linda's warning echoed in his mind. "You shouldn't be near my son," he whispered finally. Maria took a step back, her eyes filling with tears, but she didn't argue. "Ask Noah if I'm dangerous," she said softly. Her calmness made him even more uneasy. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. The next morning, David made his decision. When Maria came down to start her chores, he called her into the kitchen. The other staff stood silently nearby, sensing something was wrong. "You've done good work here," David said, his tone cold. "But I can't keep you any longer." Maria didn't speak. She simply nodded, took off her apron, and walked upstairs to pack her small bag. As she came down the stairs with her things, she saw Noah standing in the hallway. His eyes were wide and confused. She stopped, knelt down, and smiled softly. "It's okay," she said. "I'll see you again someday." Noah didn't move. He just clutched his stuffed horse tighter. When the front door closed behind her, the house felt wrong again. The silence returned, heavy and cold. By dinner, everything had fallen apart. Noah refused to eat. He screamed when anyone tried to touch him. He hit his head against the wall until bruises formed. David rushed in, trying to calm him, but nothing worked. The therapists he called gave the same answers. Increase the medicine, keep him quiet, follow the plan. But Noah wasn't calm. He was broken. "Please, son, stop," David begged, holding his arms. But the boy only cried harder. His small voice echoed through the mansion, a voice David had prayed to hear, now filled with pain. All night, he sat outside Noah's room, listening to the cries fade into exhaustion. His hands trembled, his eyes red from sleeplessness. For years, he had tried to protect his son from harm, yet now he realized he had caused it. He had taken away the one person who brought peace into that boy's world. As dawn crept through the window, David whispered to himself, "What have I done?" Down the hall, Noah woke up in tears, calling a name that shattered David's heart. "Mommy," he cried softly again and again. "Mommy." Each word cut deeper than the last. That morning, David didn't go to his company. He didn't answer calls or emails. He sat by his son's bed, watching the bruises on his small forehead, feeling more helpless than ever. He finally understood that love was not about control or power. It was about presence, and he had lost both. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'll fix this. Somehow, I'll bring her back." The promise felt heavy, but for the first time, it was the right kind of heavy. That evening, as the house fell into silence again, David made a vow that no matter what the truth was about Maria's past, he would find it, and if she had been wronged, he would make it right. 2 days passed, and the Callahan mansion had fallen into a cold quiet again. The halls that once carried a boy's soft laughter now echoed only with footsteps and sorrow. David barely ate, barely spoke. He sat in his study each night, holding a photo of Noah and his late wife, asking himself the same question over and over. Why did I listen to her? Why did I send Maria away? He knew Linda Parker's words had poisoned his mind. He had believed the reports, the papers, the warnings. But he couldn't ignore what he saw with his own eyes. Maria had reached his son when no one else could. Her calmness, her voice, her patience, all of it had broken through the silence that years of money could not. He knew now that sending her away was his greatest mistake. That morning, he made a decision. He was going to find the truth himself. He opened his laptop and searched for the old clinic where Maria had once worked, Riverbend Children's Clinic. The records were hidden deep in medical files, but with his influence, he got access. What he found changed everything. Among the files was an old report written by Dr. Henry Scott. The report was for a little boy named Noah Callahan. The words on the paper made David's hands tremble. It didn't say autism. It said sensory processing disorder. The doctor had warned that bright lights and loud sounds would overwhelm the child, that what he needed was gentle therapy, not medication or isolation. The recommendation was clear. Avoid overstimulation. Encourage emotional connection. At the bottom of the report, there was a note. Forwarded to Miss Linda Parker. David froze. Linda had received this report years ago. She knew. She had hidden it. His son had been treated for the wrong condition all along, and Maria had discovered it without even reading a paper. He slammed his laptop shut and grabbed his phone. "Linda," he said when she answered, his voice shaking, "I know what you did." Her voice stayed calm, even cold. "David, you're upset. Take a breath." "You buried that report," he said, standing now, anger rising in his chest. "You let my son suffer. You ruined that woman's life, and you lied to me." "Watch your words," she replied smoothly. "That woman is dangerous. She uses emotion to manipulate people. She used you, David. She used your son." David's voice hardened. "No, Linda. She healed him. Something you and your experts never could." He ended the call before she could reply. His decision was made. He needed Maria back, and he needed to expose Linda's lies. That afternoon, he drove to Maple Street Guest House, the place where Maria had been staying since she left. When she opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise. She looked tired but calm. "Mr. Callahan," she said softly, "why are you here?" David took a deep breath. "Because I was wrong," he said. "I should have listened to you. You were right about Noah. I found the old report, the one that said he wasn't autistic. It was hidden by Linda." Maria's eyes filled with quiet pain. "I knew something wasn't right," she whispered. "I need your help," he said, his voice cracking. "Not as an employee, but as someone who loves that boy." Maria looked at him for a long moment. "This isn't about me," she said finally. "It's about Noah. He deserves peace. Please," David said softly. "Come back home." Maria nodded. "I'll come," she said, "but not for you. For him." They drove in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky with orange light. When they reached the mansion, Noah was sitting in the corner of the living room, hugging his stuffed horse, staring blankly at the floor. When he saw Maria step through the door, his eyes changed. He stood slowly, then ran to her, dropping the toy. His arms wrapped tightly around her waist as he whispered through tears, "You came back, Mommy." Maria knelt down, hugging him close. Her eyes filled with tears. "I told you I'd see you again," she whispered back. David stood behind them, watching with tears streaming down his face. In that moment, all his pride melted away. He didn't care about his wealth or his company, only about the small boy who finally looked alive again. For the first time, David knelt beside them and placed his arms around both of them. "We're home now," he said softly. Later that night, while Noah slept peacefully, Maria and David sat at the dining table with papers spread out between them. The old reports, the false accusations, the forged records all pointing back to Linda Parker. Maria took a deep breath. "She's not going to stop," she said. "She'll ruin both of us if we don't act." David nodded. "Then we'll fight," he said. "Not for revenge, but for truth." They contacted lawyer Tom and investigator Mark. With their help, they gathered every piece of proof they could find: the medical report, the altered documents, the phone recordings that exposed Linda's lies. It was time for the truth to reach the light. When the case went to court, the room was packed. Linda Parker sat with her lawyers, calm but pale. Maria sat beside lawyer Tom, holding her hands tightly together. David sat behind them, his jaw clenched. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Witness after witness took the stand. Former nurses spoke about Linda's manipulation. Parents described being misled about their children's conditions. Then, finally, Maria took the stand. She didn't cry, didn't shout. She spoke softly, clearly, with honesty that filled the room. "All I ever wanted," she said, "was to help children. I was accused, blamed, and silenced. But I never stopped caring. I didn't fix Noah. He fixed me. I just stayed when others walked away." The courtroom was silent. Even Linda's lawyers looked uneasy. Then came the final piece of evidence, a voicemail Linda had left for Maria years ago. Her voice played through the speakers, sharp and cold. "You speak again, and I'll destroy you." Gasps filled the courtroom. The truth was undeniable. Linda's lies were out in the open. The judge reviewed the evidence, then looked directly at Linda. "This court finds you guilty of professional misconduct and deliberate falsification of records," he said firmly. "You are hereby banned from medical and advisory practice." The gavel struck. The case was over. Maria sat still, tears in her eyes. David exhaled for the first time in weeks, relief washing over him like a storm finally breaking. When they stepped outside the courthouse, the wind felt lighter. Maria turned to him and said softly, "It's over." He nodded. "No, it's just beginning," he said. "Now we start healing for real." Days later, Maria returned to the mansion for good. Noah was waiting at the window when the car pulled in. The moment she stepped out, he ran into her arms again. His laughter filled the air, a sound no one had heard in years. David watched from the doorway, his heart full. The mansion changed after that. It was no longer a place of silence. It became a home. There were drawings on the walls, messy breakfast plates on the table, and laughter echoing through the rooms. David smiled more, worked less, and spent his evenings playing with his son. Maria hummed while she cooked, her voice like sunlight in the air. Months later, David and Maria started something new, the Callahan Family Foundation, a place that offered help to children who had been misdiagnosed or mistreated. They built therapy rooms filled with calm lights, soft music, and open doors. The motto on the entrance wall read, "Every child deserves to be seen." On the day of the foundation's opening, people gathered in the hall, cameras flashing, journalists whispering. David spoke first, his voice steady. "This foundation exists because one woman refused to give up," he said. "Her kindness reminded me that healing begins when we listen." Then Noah, now more confident, stepped forward holding his little toy stethoscope. The crowd fell silent. He looked up at his father, then at Maria, and spoke softly into the microphone. "This is my mommy," he said. "She healed me. Now I help her." Tears filled every eye in the room. Maria covered her mouth, her heart too full for words. David lowered his head, hiding his tears. At that moment, they knew this was no longer a story of loss, but of rebirth. A broken family had found its way back to love, not through money, but through faith, patience, and kindness. That night, as the crowd left and the lights dimmed, Maria stood outside the mansion watching Noah play in the yard. David joined her, their shoulders touching lightly. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly. "Yes," she said. With a cup of milk and a song, they both laughed quietly, watching their son chase fireflies in the warm evening air. For the first time in years, peace filled their hearts. David took a deep breath and said, "I don't deserve this, but I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful." Maria looked at him, her eyes kind. "You don't have to deserve love," she said. "You just have to give it back." In the soft glow of the night, the mansion stood warm and alive, no longer a place of pain, but of healing. The silence that once haunted it had turned into gentle laughter, and in that laughter lived the proof that miracles can come from the quietest hearts.